You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 9th of December 2024 on Monocle Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Giorgia Scaturro and Brant will discuss today's big stories, and we'll speak to Professor Karthik Ramanna of Oxford University about his new book of lessons on how governments and corporations can face down the pitchfork-toting mobs of our outraged age. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I'm joined today by Giorgia Scaturro, London-based Italian reporter and producer, and by Brant, presenter and former China correspondent at the BBC. Hello to you both.
Hello. Hello.
Giorgia, you first of all have been distributing awards to journalists who have been covering events akin to Syria, but not actually Syria, because that's kind of crept up on everybody.
Yes, we've recently had the Foreign Press Association Media Awards, and as always, international journalists are nominated for these international awards. Many awards this year as well went to reporters who bravely covered conflicts such as Gaza or Ukraine. In the nominees, no one was covering Syria, so it took us all by surprise what's happened in the last few days.
Well, we will be coming back to Syria shortly, but Robin, you, as I understand it, have been in the United States in search of the future of medicine.
I come to these moments looking for something really good to share with you about what I've been doing. You know, I might have been to somewhere good in London, maybe I've had a holiday in the past, and frankly, I always feel as though I disappoint you a bit. But this time, I was in the States a couple of weeks ago meeting people who work for a small company that span out of an operation in Yale in New Haven, the university there, and they are taking donor organs from people whose life has ended, and they are doing AI-driven research on these organs in the hope to get out a huge amount of information about how some of these organs react potentially to the drugs of the future. And to cut it down to size, what this is about is trying to make the process of developing the drugs of the future, which can take 10 to 15 years, they hope that maybe, just maybe, they can do that in a couple of years' time. So this was a small group of people. I was just there to hear their story, give them a bit of advice and support, but just fascinating, completely out of my usual world.
Well, I do look forward to hearing more about that at some point, because these are the people who will enable us to live another 300 years each, as I understand it. But we will start tonight in Syria, and it is obviously impossible to punt confidently on what is going to happen next, and prudent to be pretty suspicious of anyone who proclaims with any amount of certainty what is going to happen next. But if there is one thing we can be sure will definitely occur, because it is already occurring, it is that many of the millions of Syrians displaced by 13 years of war and scattered across the world will go home again. A reminder that fleeing to start afresh in a foreign country is not the first choice of most people. Giorgia, first of all, going back to what you were just talking about, I think we can all admit to ourselves, even as journalists who are supposed to pay attention to such things, that we were all a bit surprised by the speed at which events unfolded. How surprised were you personally?
Extremely surprised, I have to say. And when I saw that image of Assad's father the statue being toppled, my mind went obviously straight to Iraq and the iconic image of Saddam Hussein. And it was difficult to then make a parallel, whether it was my brain reliving a moment in the midst of this conflicts atmosphere that we all live in, or this was actually the reality. Well, it just happens to be reality, which makes it the next few weeks to the end of the new year, or 2024, and the beginning of 2025, particularly blurry. As for a journalist, is not a position we are comfortable with. Donald Trump, this new conflict is sort of a deus ex machina, this Al-Jolani rebel that came out of nowhere and is causing the world to just focus on eventually again what's been happening in Syria.
I mean, Robin, moments such as this are extraordinary, and Giorgia refers to the statue and the memories it evokes of Saddam Hussein being hauled off his plinth in Firdas Square in Baghdad in 2003. And I was in Baghdad, not at that moment, but very shortly afterwards. And I guess it's a similar atmosphere in Damascus now. There is a lot of excitement and a lot of trepidation. But is this a moment at which there is a role to be played by what we might think of as the Western democratic world, or is this a moment at which maybe the Western democratic world should absorb some of the lessons of the last 20-odd years and let Syrians sort this out themselves?
Well, I mean, there are those comparisons, aren't there? We can see instantly with the aftermath of Libya when Gaddafi was briefly held and killed, and with the deposition, as you said, of Saddam Hussein and Iraq. And look what happened in both those countries, bloodshed on an unimaginable scale. There is a view, I think, among some that Syria may be one of those countries so intrinsically important to the Middle East and to its future that to an extent is beyond the kind of imperious help of the bigger powers, but is maybe not yet ready because of its intense complexities, its intense social complexities, its intense ethnic and religious complexities to stand on its own. What I think is most interesting when it comes to the surprising nature of the events over the last few days, and of course it was just days, is the intelligence community and the extent to which they saw this coming. And John Sawers, the man who used to be in charge of MI6 here in the UK, spoke of being surprised, but that is not something that he sees at this stage as being a sign of failure. And I thought those two different distinctions were, I mean, you might say, of course, he would say that, although he's no longer in post, but those two things I think are distinctly different. But I'm sure one thing we will get on to amidst the questions and the analysis is the concern about those ISIS prisoners, their families, many of them still held in parts of Syria, and in the capitals across Europe, Berlin and Paris and London in particular. There'll be huge concern about what happens to some of those people and the threat that they may pose if the people holding them aren't able to continue to do that and they come home.
Well, indeed, and we may therefore get sort of a recurrence, Giorgia, of the arguments that were had in 2015 when we saw that huge column of refugees, not all from Syria, but many from Syria, trudging across Europe, an event which I, for one, believe you can draw a fairly straight line from to the decision of the voters of this country to leave the European Union the following year. Those images were, I stress, used as a thoroughly ill-faith, mendacious scare campaign by the Leave campaign here in the UK. But I mean, this is a moment at which possibly we can assess the impact of Syrian refugees on European politics. Has it played a role, or has it been the thing lit upon by bad faith populists to advance their cause?
Well, because you mentioned 2015, back then we had Angela Merkel in Germany saying the famous words, "We can do this." And then we see what this led. Now Olaf is well away from saying the same words, especially when the right wings, the Farages of the world are really blowing on the card of immigration to claim their power. So this is an extremely politically delicate field at the moment. In fact, we have seen the UK as well as Germany and Austria freezing the asylum application in the waiting for the situation to unfold, see what is going to happen. For Italy, our Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani, he really stressing the importance of assuring the next steps towards a political rather than a military solutions, and one solution that has to really draw on the respect of all minorities in Syria for peace and stability. Because let's not forget, in the 1970s, when the Assad dynasty took over, what was the reason that they could exploit the divisions, the sects there were at the time, and there are still today, and they took control of the military and made sure that the power was circulating in small circles of elites. So we'd be forgiven to think that perhaps Al-Jilani and these new rebels might want to fill the same boots, somehow be tempted by power. So this is the moment where everyone, obviously, as Robin was mentioning, we have Libya and Iraq as history repeating. We don't want that. So we don't want an intervention as such, but really we all need to be prepared to promote, to make sure that peace and stability and inclusiveness is the main force carrying the next steps in Syria now.
Robin, just as a final thought on this, if we do start to see large numbers of Syrians going back home, and obviously we can only hope that conditions emerge that enables that if that's what they want to do, can we entertain any hope that this will take any heat out of the debate around migration, or will those interested in maintaining that argument just find another scapegoat? Because here in the UK, if every Syrian refugee here went home tomorrow, I don't think really anybody would notice. It's not that many people, despite what they may wish to tell us. Well, it's about 30,000 people, I think.
You partially answered the question. The question. I mean, certainly when it pertains to the UK, Syrian refugees, many of whom are genuine refugees seeking asylum, are not a sizable number. And we had the figures just a couple of weeks ago showing record numbers of net migration. And so I think, pardon the kind of the crude analogy here, but that ship has sailed, essentially. I think the world has changed. The world has changed in Germany. Look at German politics now. The world has changed in Italy. Look at Prime Minister Meloni, and the world has changed here in the United Kingdom. And frankly, I don't think seeing the return of sizable numbers of Syrians going back to their home at last for them, as many would see it, I don't think that will change the dynamic of the domestic politics on immigration.
Well, sticking with and yet vaulting off the subject of migration, one aspect of Italy's efforts to address the issue has found itself endowed with the sobriquet the Musk Bill, in honour of the supernaturally annoying billionaire nitwit of that name. The Musk Bill, passed by the Italian Senate but rejected by the High Council of the Judiciary, would give appeals courts the power to rule on the detention of migrants, with a view to facilitating the big idea of Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni to transfer migrants to Albania. It became known as the Musk Bill after Musk enthused about the proposal and criticised Italy's judges like any of this was anything to do with him. Giorgia, first of all, we have heard from President Sergio Mattarella to the effect that Musk should, shut his yap. The president did phrase it a little more gracefully than that, but is that something you would like to see more national leaders doing when extremely rich Americans start having opinions?
Well, it's good that you mentioned Mattarella, because he's the epitome of composure and calmness. So, the way he framed it was Italy is a democratic country, so we know how to deal with this. Thank you very much, Mr. Musk. Unfortunately, the richest man in the world happens to have a special relationship with our Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, and if you visit the internet, you will see a video of them kissing, obviously AI generated, but stems from the fact that, the two had an encounter in the United States where Giorgia Meloni received the Global Citizen Award 2024, and Elon Musk was spotted saying she's even more beautiful on the inside than she's on the outside, to which Giorgia Meloni replied, Mr. Musk is a precious genius. So we know what the, relationship there, and so which could turn handy these days, where obviously we all expecting Donald Trump with somehow of the known unknown, and Giorgia Meloni, who is seen as one of the most stable leaders in Europe, could be somehow the trade union between the US, Donald Trump and his ally Elon Musk, and Europe. So we find ourselves in the situation where we'll have to balance where and really measure where we want to be as a country, considering that this special relationships is both ways.
Robin, Elon Musk is obviously very much not the first gajillionaire plutocrat who's wanted to have his political opinions listened to. Does it strike you you that this is any better, worse, more, less dangerous than someone like Rupert Murdoch wanting his opinions listened to?
I think it's very different. Rupert Murdoch, as wealthy as he is, seemed to go about pursuing his agenda in a slightly more subtle way. I think that's the correct use of the word.
There's not many things that are less subtle than Elon Musk's approach, mind you.
But I mean, listen to Nick Clegg, the former Deputy Prime Minister in this country and now the number 2 man at Meta, the owner of Instagram and Facebook, who spoke of Elon Musk as a potential puppet, a political puppet master the other day. And he sees a malevolent force in Elon Musk. He doesn't see another J.D. Rockefeller. He doesn't see another George Soros. He sees someone far more troubling. I think that is because he sees a man with truly global reach, who is not just driven by a particular cause, a cause that he's been wedded to maybe from all of his adult life, but is much more a populist, attaching himself to political figures or political movements that fit his desires of the day, and also seems to think that he does have a writ large, mainly because of X and Twitter and its global reach, to interfere, to intervene, to have nothing else, have a very assertive say in the domestic politics of plenty of different countries. So there are those, and I've talked about Nick Clegg just then, who see a far more malevolent threat than others might see.
Georgia, do you think we are going to get a sense that European countries will assume that Elon Musk is the one who is really running the United States?
Well, first of all, we have to say that he's leading the Department of Government Efficiency, but this role is merely a role to provide guidance. So it's not an official role. So yes, I think he will boost Donald Trump's ego and somehow appetite for deregulations. We know already how it stands for NATO, the WTO. Donald Musk might get rid of everything. And so Elon Musk might fit into this plan. But when it comes to the actual role, we know that it will be an advisory role more than what he says will become a policy.
I mean, I have to say, let's look at Elon Musk and his increasingly significant relationship with J.D. Vance, the heir apparent already, the man who is the future of Trumpism, the man who is the future of the MAGA movement. I think it's their marriage, and it's a strange marriage in many ways, because they're not people who have been political bedfellows in the past, but I think it's their marriage which shows you that Elon Musk, aside from having given hundreds of $millions to a man who really regards financial support and loyalty as being very important, that's Donald Trump, but it's the marriage, I think, of J.D. Vance and Elon Musk that shows you how significant a role the SpaceX and Tesla owner will have now from day one and in the years ahead. Although there are many who look back to Trump 1.0 and look at what happened to some of those prominent figures there and say Musk-Trump is not going to last very long.
Well, let's move along somewhat, because despite various promises that may have been made to the people of the United Kingdom over the last 8 years or so, trade deals are not easy or straightforward things to wrangle. It is, for example, possible, gusting likely, that some people who participated in the first trade deal negotiations between the EU and Mercosur back in 1999 did not live to see last Friday's signing ceremony involving European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and 4 Latin American leaders. The deal is still not yet entirely done. However, it requires approval of EU member states, and some, notably Poland and France, are unkeen. Robin, do we know what those who are you'll start that question again. Do we know what those who are unhappy with this are unhappy about?
Yeah, I think they're unhappy about the threat to their domestic markets, their farmers. They're unhappy about as what they see as unlevel playing fields. I mean, it's all the usual things that very powerful forces within the 27 member states will complain about. It's the price you pay for opening up a market, isn't it? Is you have to open up your market, and they're two-way streets. And of course, there are huge benefits going the other way as well. But you look to some of those in the Republic of Ireland as well, a far smaller economy, but with a huge agricultural sector, who are hugely concerned concerned about the threat, as they see it, posed by mass agrarian operations in Latin America and what it could potentially do to their domestic marketplaces.
It does seem, Giorgia, that Italy may be the key country here. That depending on which, it's up to Italy in which way it jumps on whether this thing actually happens or not. Do we get a sense of how that's likely to go? Is Giorgia Meloni as terrified as Emmanuel Macron and Donald Tusk clearly are of the streets of the capital being choked by angry men in overalls driving tractors?
Well, Giorgia Meloni is very clear on this and on the US. In her words, same name, but not the Georgia you have in front of you. Giorgia Meloni, don't ask what the US can do for us, but what the EU should do for itself. And that relates to this because it's all about boosting our competitiveness, tariff and defense, and obviously having an agreement as Mercosur that opens the market for something like 800 million citizens in the world, lower prices, boosts investments. It's quite palatable at this particular moment in time. Now, in her government, she has her Minister of Agriculture saying it's not an acceptable deal, not until it will feature some stronger safeguards for European farmers, workers' rights and the environment, while we have the Foreign Minister in being more open to going ahead.
I mean, the geopolitics as well of this increasing significance of South America, and these countries in particular. China has had a free trade deal with Chile for more than 15 years now. I think it's probably approaching 20 years. Chilean wine is very cheap in China. It's a huge market. And China has long seen that the benefits of enduring trade relationships with many South American countries and has seen the broader geopolitical strategic benefit to having a good relationship with those countries in terms of trade, in terms of potential security relationships going forward as well. And the European Union realises that as well. This is about trade, but of course it's not just about trade. It's about improving those relationships with those countries, and it's about seeing where your adversaries or where your competitors have an established stronghold and trying to ensure that you can compete there as well. So there is that element as well.
But just to follow that up, Robin, von der Leyen seems to be framing this, or seems to think this deal may be kind of a buffer, a bulwark against an incoming protectionist US administration, that she sort of seems to think that Latin America and the EU might be able to trade around the United States.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the de-risking strategy, isn't it, that we saw the European Union apply to supply chains in terms of China in the post-COVID world, and maybe this is an element of that. Choose your language. They're de-risking, they're hedging. Everyone knows what's coming with the Trump 2.0 administration. Everyone knows the tariffs are coming. And the European Union needs to find a way to exploit and establish those new marketplaces, as has just been articulated far more eloquently before me. I think what fascinates me so much about the Trump administration is, I think, the speed at which this administration is going to put the pedal to the metal in terms of tariffs. We already know what the European Union's attitude is to EV technology. We already know what China's attitude is to brandy dumping. We're seeing those moves in place already in terms of the relationship between those two massive trading blocs. But we know that Donald Trump is going to act very, very quickly. The severity of it, I think, it's slightly less than maybe we had foreseen in the first place, not up in the 100% territory, but we know it's coming, don't we? And it's just a matter of days now, and everyone is kind of shifting their parts into place in preparation.
Well, let's move along now. And in most European countries, some amount of competitive pride is attached to the nation's rail services. The United Kingdom is an obvious exception, united in this respect around a bleak yet completely accurate consensus that British railways are 1, riotously expensive, and 2, terrible. The campaign group Transport and Environment has published what it believes is a definitive ranking of European railway services. Best, Italy's Trenitalia Trenitalia ahead, controversially, of Switzerland's SBB and the Czech Republic's RegioJet. Worst, Eurostar, just somewhat more miserable than Greece's Hellenic Trains and the insufferably named low-cost French outfit Ouigo. Giorgia, obviously, as an actual Italian at this table, we have to put this to you. And is this one of those things where people who don't have to live with something regard it more romantically than the people who do? Because my own experience of Trenitalia, I have to say, has been pretty much exemplary. I was talking earlier, we were talking earlier of a trip I did on a Trenitalia train, sitting there agog at how removed this was from the British experience. Bologna to Rimini in first class, in a lovely big chair, somebody bringing me espressos whenever I wanted one. It was like €10. I was just sitting there thinking, why can't we all have one of these? This is marvellous. Is Trenitalia like that all the time?
Well, I have to say, first of all, let's stop for a moment to how they look. They're sleek, they're red, Frecciarossa,
right,
they
don't
look
rub
like...
it in.
and they're all, like an Italian Shinkansen. So as a boast of pride, 7.7 out of 10. And this is for the travel experience. They might be doing something right, and it is very pleasant to travel on board. However, Italians being Italians, we know we like to complain. So we again have some part of travellers, in particular the commuters unions from Genoa to Milan, that complains that 1 in 2 trains is delayed. In fact, punctuality, according to the same survey, is an issue that is common between all the trains. 11 out of 27 operators are not punctual, which makes me think my favourite European train operators or transport operators is Tokyo Metro Company. You might say, how outlandish is that? But it's just simply because they now entered the Elizabeth line.
They have.
And I'm really looking forward to see how they will run it.
See, Robin, have SBB been unlucky here? Because the Swiss Railways...
You've got shares in SBB.
I do not have shares in SBB, but I have sat on their trains many times and found myself thinking, is there some way we could get the people in charge of SBB in charge of basically everything?
Well, I mean, I have good news for you. You can have the Trenitalia experience only 15 minutes from here.
How
because
do I
if
do
you
that?
trudge down to Euston Station, as I did the other day...
Why would anybody trudge to Euston Station?
Well, I was reminded that if you get a train up to Manchester on the Avanti service, Avanti is a joint venture between First Group and Trenitalia.
Oh.
Trenitalia owns part of Avanti.
But Euston Station is what hell will be like.
I'm just trying to do my bit for the underrepresented British railway population, many of whom I just know are listening so frustratingly and angrily at your... No, the point I'm making is
even if they are listening, Robin, and with due apologies, they will be first against the wall when the revolution comes.
So Trenitalia has dibs in many UK companies, and there must be something good about what's going on in terms of Great British railway provision, because there are plenty of European providers who own part of them, aren't there? You know, Deutsche Bahn, Trenitalia as well. There are others. So, they see money, they see profit, they see reward in what's going on here. But I think the fact that maybe private operators have been allowed to come in, no criticism here of those people, that may be the root of the problem. Of course, the privatisation of our rails, many people would say, has been at the root of the whole problem.
I do want to close by asking you each in turn what your actual favourite railway journey is. And I will nominate mine first, and it is Giorgia. It's a Trenitalia route that is popping into my head, and I did this route. I've done it a couple of times, but I did it for a story for Monocle's The Escapist a few years ago, and it is that lunatic service which goes from Milan to Palermo, but they do that thing once you get to the end of Italy, or the mainland of Italy. They take the whole train off the rails and break it up into several bits and roll it onto a ferry, then sail across the Straits of Messina and then reassemble the train at the other end so you can continue. It takes ages, it makes no sense at all, because why do we not just get off the train, get on the ferry and get on another train on the other side? But they insist on doing this thing, and I think it's kind of magnificent.
It's very romantic, and you can do the journey during the night. So you wake up on the other side, similarly to go to Scotland on the night
Caledonian
train,
Sleeper, yeah.
Caledonian Sleeper. So yeah, it's got that sort of fascination, and so kudos for Trenitalia. I was trying to completely blot out Trenitalia UK for a reason that Robin mentioned has been spotted. But yes, I think that there is a level of train is a romantic way of travelling. So anything that can contribute to the experience.
I mean, I was on the sleeper version, and the romance of the experience was abrogated somewhat by the fact that there was this utter sociopath in the next compartment watching opera with, like, no headphones on his laptop, which on the one hand, for the first few minutes, okay, that's kind of magnificently Italian, and then you get rapidly to, mate, shut up or I will kill you. But do you actually have a favourite railway journey anywhere in the world? Doesn't have to be Italy.
Do you know, for very personal reasons, I think the same. My father was from Sicily, and I travelled with my brother from Florence, where it's home to us, to Sicily to just savour the journey, going to meet our roots to Sicily. So partly it's personal, again, the experience, the romance of it, but it was an extremely pleasant journey.
Robin, do you have a favourite train journey?
Firstly, train journey home is always the best one. More broadly, my most memorable train experience is a very brief one. It's 8 minutes. I've never fully come to terms with feeling safe on this train, but it goes from the airport in Shanghai to a railway station on the outskirts of the city, and it's a maglev train, magnetic levitation. It's the fastest train in the world, and it goes at about 430 kilometres an hour. It's about 230 miles an hour, and it takes you to the airport. 8 minutes. I went on it about 10 times. I never quite felt comfortable, but it gets you there really, really quickly.
Robin Brant and Giorgia Scaturro, thank you both very much for joining us. Finally, on today's show, it is an open question whether ours is an angrier age than any previous, or whether there is just more space available in which to express rages hitherto thwarted. Whatever the reason, it is something that all varieties of leader, political, corporate, whatever, have to learn to address. And some ideas about how are discussed in The Age of Outrage, How to Lead in a Polarised World, by Karthik Ramanna, Professor of Business and Public Policy at the Blavnatic School of Government at Oxford University. I spoke to Karthik earlier, and I began by asking whether he thinks we have actually become angrier as a species, or just freer to express it in public.
I often get asked about this, in particular in the context of social media, and, whether it's social media that's somehow implicated in all of this. And my response to it is that social media is a catalytic factor, but it's not a causal factor. So if for some way we were able to magically eliminate social media, we would still be in an age of outrage. And that's because this age of outrage is really characterized by some pretty profound underlying shifts. There's what we call a fear of the future, the sense that we're on a cusp of AI changing the way the world works in the same way the Industrial Revolution changed the way the world worked. We have to deal with climate change and everything that entails. Now, you put all of these sort of, emerging macro trends in the context that we have very low trust in our institution. Polarization in the United States is sort of as severe as it was just before the Civil War. It's the fact that many people feel they've been handed a raw deal by their elites. And then you layer onto that this growing sense of othering, seeing the world in us versus them terms, rather than in sort of a global enlightenment type of perspective where we were all, through the pursuit of knowledge, somehow going to advance human flourishing. So, all of these forces of course, as you indicate, have always been present in human history, but the fact that they're all present at the same time and the degree to which that they are manifesting in this moment, that's what creates this age of outrage.
But without wishing to let go of my argument entirely, your book and the Oxford course you teach relies a lot on case studies, of organisations as diverse as IKEA, Nestle, the Metropolitan Police, the Vatican. But even if there is something new going on, do you see them still trying to face down anger in the the same old ways, or are institutions getting better at adapting to it?
So that's a great question. And I think that part of the premise and theme of the book is that managing in the age of outrage is not managing outrage. Managing outrage is crisis management. And, you bring in a PR team and they'll figure out, how to spin it and so forth. And organizations, particularly large, sophisticated organizations, got quite good at that. But managing in the age of outrage means, that the velocity of these kinds of episodes or crises is so great that you can't possibly handle it just through crisis management, because then you'd always be in crisis management mode. And when would you do, if you're always in firefighting mode, when would you do fire prevention and fire planning strategies? But more importantly, when would you do the things that you're really there to do, like the growth and innovation and human flourishing and so forth? So it does require a completely different approach to it. The other reason managing the age of outrage is different than managing outrage is that some of the outrage we're talking about in the world is quite justified, perhaps, depending on whom you ask. And merely trying to deal with it as if it is PR or spin, that will come back to bite, because there are these sort of profound social cleavages, and people see many established institutions, including commercial institutions, as just rotten. So we have to figure out how to address those.
But what's a practical example then of the prevention technique rather than, as you suggest, fighting the fire, the idea of preventing the fire from starting in the first place? Because we've all been on the receiving end of those anger management techniques about how somebody understands how frustrated we are, which, speaking only for myself, makes me several times angrier than I was when I picked the phone up. But in terms of how an institution projects itself, what can they do to forestall having to deal with this stuff at all?
The best example I've seen of this is an institution called the Kaduna State Peace Commission, particularly when it was led by this rather remarkable woman called Priscilla Ankud. So Priscilla was appointed as the first CEO of this commission that was created by the governor of Kaduna State. Kaduna State is a state in north-central Nigeria. Like much of Nigeria, which is sort of divided by the divisions between a Christian north and a Muslim south, Kaduna State is so divided as well. And fortunately, there's a great deal of violence in Kaduna State. And so this somewhat sort of, divisive Muslim governor appoints Priscilla Ankud, who is a Christian from the south, to serve as the first CEO of this commission. And being the kind of data-driven manager that she was, she decided to study, well, what where's this violence coming from? And as she looks at the data, she notices that it isn't quite random as you might imagine it is to be, but rather it's quite cyclical. It's almost like a sine wave, it's sort of predictable. And then when you plot that on sort of key events on the x-axis, you notice that it lines up quite carefully with elections. So there's sort of this manufactured industry of violence around elections. So then what she ends up doing is identify who are some of the catalytic people in society that might be inadvertently or maliciously making incendiary remarks on things like social media during times of elections that exacerbate the violence. And she invites them in an ad personam capacity, not in an ex officio capacity. So one of them might be affiliated with, say, the Christian Association of Nigeria. One might be affiliated with the equivalent Muslim Association, etc. But she doesn't bring them in their institutional capacity because she worries that those institutions aren't really set up to de-escalate the violence. In fact, they're incentivized to keep tensions high. So she invites them in a personal capacity and creates this body called the House of Kaduna Family, which is a rather remarkable organization. In fact, when I first sort of encountered it, it sounded to me quite corny, House of Kaduna Family, what does that mean? But what she's doing is she's humanizing these key catalytic individuals in society. She's getting them to know each other on a personal level. And she's getting them to build a personal relationship with each other and build a trust with each other. There's this great line from Michelle Obama where she says, you can't hate someone when you know them. And that's what she's doing. So then when the elections roll around, it's not that the violence magically disappears, if only it were that simple. Because they've built this personal relationship with each other, when things get really rough, they have that to call, they can call upon each other. They can seek ways to de-escalate a situation so it doesn't spill over into violence. And that's a sense of an organization that's anticipated the problem, built the trust well in advance of when it needs it, and humanized the protagonists so that they can make progress on it. Obviously, there are organizations that have done this in the commercial space as well. But I think the key lesson there is don't be surprised and start the preparation, start the planning well before you need it.
That was Karthik Ramanna, Professor of Business and Public Policy at the Blavnatic School of Government at Oxford University. The Age of Outrage, How to Lead in a Polarised World, is available now. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Giorgia Scaturro and Robin Brant. Today's show was produced by Chris Chermak and researched by Maisie Ringer. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.